I was near death, alone, and desperate for help, but my children refused to lift a finger. After everything I did for them, they turned their backs when I needed them most. But when they came for the inheritance, thinking I was too weak to fight back, that's when everything changed. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. I had always thought that when you're nearing the end of your life, you would want nothing more than the comfort of your family around you, but that's not how it happened. The illness had been a slow descent. It started small, a cough that wouldn't go away, a weakness in my legs I couldn't shake. But it soon spiraled. Doctors offered their condolences with a bedside manner that masked their true intentions. They didn't think I had long. So I returned home, where I could at least be surrounded by the life I had built, the family I had raised. The house was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where love and memories resided. But instead, it had become a prison of my own making. It wasn't long after I arrived that I began to notice how much they had all changed. They were all too busy to visit, too wrapped up in their own lives to spend any real time with me. My son Mark didn't even pick up the phone when I called, and my daughter Laura, who used to sit by my side for hours when she was young, didn't even leave me a message. I had sacrificed everything for them. I worked late into the night, built their futures with my own hands, and never once asked for anything in return. I thought that when my time came, they would be there, if not for me, then for the memories of all the sacrifices I had made. But it seemed I had been mistaken. The night that it happened, I was sitting alone in my chair. I had just finished my dinner, trying to make myself eat despite the taste of metal in my mouth. My body felt weak, and every movement seemed like a monumental effort. But as I sat there in that quiet house, I heard the unmistakable sound of the front door creaking open. I looked up, expecting the sight of my children, or at least one of them. But instead, it was just Laura and her husband, Steve. They entered the living room, their voices filled with laughter and excitement. "Did you see that new property they're selling?" Laura asked, her voice high-pitched with enthusiasm. "I can't wait to buy it." Steve, her husband, chuckled. "We'll have to get rid of that old house first, though." It was like a punch in the gut. They weren't talking about selling my house, not yet. But they were already planning their next move. Moving on, as if I were already gone. "How's Dad doing?" Laura asked, glancing in my direction. I couldn't even bring myself to answer. The words felt like they were stuck in my throat. But it wasn't just the silence that struck me, it was the absence of care in her voice. There was no concern, no sympathy. Just a passing comment before she turned her attention back to Steve. I watched them, and in that moment, it was as though the floor beneath me had dropped away. They were just here for the inheritance. All these years I had given my blood, my sweat, my love, and in return, they had nothing to offer me but their indifference. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just got up and walked out of my own house. No one noticed. No one called out to stop me. As I stepped out into the cold night, I realized something I had refused to see before. My family had already moved on. They didn't need me anymore. I was a relic, a burden to be dealt with. The truth hit me with the finality of a closed door. It wasn't love they had for me anymore. It was obligation. They no longer cared for me. They were only waiting for me to die so they could collect what I had left behind. I didn't go far, just to the old garden. Out back, where I had spent hours planting flowers for their mother. Where I had built the stone pathway with my own hands. The same path they would soon walk down when they came for the inheritance they thought was their right. And as I stood there, alone in the darkness, I realized something else. This wasn't just betrayal. This was the beginning of something much darker. They had underestimated me. They thought I was weak, that I would fade away quietly. But they were wrong. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The house was more than just walls and a roof to me. It was a testament to everything I had worked for. The hours spent in a hard, relentless grind, the sacrifices made with no expectation of reward. I remember the first time I laid the foundation, the smell of fresh-cut timber filling the air. The sound of the hammer striking the nails, the dust that settled over every inch of the place, all of it was an extension of me. This house wasn't just a structure. It was my life's work. The rooms were filled with memories, some of them bright, some bitter, but all precious in their own way. The kitchen was where I spent countless nights cooking meals for my family, the scent of roasted chicken and homemade bread filling the air, the laughter of my children echoing off the walls. It was where I taught them how to chop vegetables, how to measure ingredients, and where they learned the value of sitting down to a meal together. I think back to those nights when we would sit at the dinner table. The clatter of plates and silverware, blending with the hum of family chatter. We'd talk about school, about work, about dreams for the future. I remember the proud smile on my wife's face as she watched our children eat, knowing that we had built something real, something solid. There was love in the air, thick enough to breathe in. We were a family, and this house was our fortress. I knew then that this was where everything I worked for would be anchored, where my family would always return. But time has a funny way of changing things. It wasn't long before the children started to grow older. Their world expanded beyond these walls, and the laughter that once filled the rooms began to fade. My son Mark, the one I had always thought of as my heir, the one who had been my pride and joy, stopped coming home. He moved out the moment he could. I remember the day he packed his things. His room, once a sanctuary filled with posters of his favorite bands, his soccer trophies, stood empty. I stood there, in the doorway, watching as he packed his life into a car, barely sparing me a glance. "Don't worry, Dad," he had said. A quick hug, and he was gone. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed louder than any goodbye. And Laura, my daughter, she was no better. I remember how we used to bake together, how we'd make cookies late into the night, laughing about silly things. She'd ask me about life, and I'd share stories of my own childhood, of struggles and triumphs, hoping she would learn something from the mistakes I'd made. But, as the years passed, she grew distant, no longer interested in the late-night talks or the kitchen rituals we once shared. I never understood where it had gone wrong, but by the time she married Steve, the space between us had grown too wide to bridge. They were gone. The house, once filled with the hum of life, now sat empty. I used to sit by the window, looking out at the garden that I had carefully tended over the years. It was a peaceful space, full of flowers, bushes, and trees that I had planted with my own hands. There had been days when I would sit out there with my wife, sipping coffee in the morning sun, talking about our dreams and hopes for the future. But even she was gone now. The silence left by her absence was like a vacuum, pulling everything into it, leaving behind only the memories of what we had once had. In the evenings, I would walk through the halls, my footsteps echoing against the cold floor. I could still hear the laughter of my children, the way their voices had filled the air when they were small. But now, the house felt hollow. The walls that once seemed to pulse with life now felt like they were closing in on me, pressing in. With every step I took, I think back to the sacrifices I made, the long hours I spent working overtime to ensure they had everything they needed: clothes, food, opportunities. There were days I came home late, exhausted to even speak, but I did it because I believed that this house, this family, was worth it. I would do it again in a heartbeat. But now, I wondered if they ever realized the price I had paid. And when I left that night, when I walked out into the darkness, I realized something. This house, this home, it had once been the center of my world. The place where I had given everything to create a life for my family. But now, it was just a house. It had no warmth, no life. It used to be filled with love. Now, it echoed with silence. The first time I helped Mark with his college tuition, I didn't hesitate. The loan papers, the financial strain, it all seemed like nothing in comparison to his future. The promise I made to myself was simple. I would do whatever it took to give him a chance to succeed. My parents had given me nothing but a hard road, and I vowed I would make sure my children had a different path, a better one. I remember the day I wrote the check for his tuition. My hand shook slightly as I signed it, the numbers on the paper, a weight I would carry for years. But the pride I felt as I handed it to him overshadowed everything else. "You're going to do great things," I told him. Even as I felt the sting of those 3 words from his mouth, "Thanks, Dad," it was always a quiet thanks, as though it was expected. As though it was just another part of the deal. Years passed, and I never stopped giving. When Laura needed a down payment for her first house, I didn't hesitate then either. I cashed out a portion of my savings and handed her the check with a smile, not even giving it a second thought. I thought of it as a step toward securing her future, the same way I had tried to secure Mark's. "I'll pay you back," she promised. Her eyes filled with gratitude. But I didn't want the money back, I never did. I wanted to see them thrive, to see them flourish. As she and Steve moved into their new home, I was content. I could barely recall how tight my budget had become, how many sacrifices I'd made. The evenings spent working late, the weekends spent cutting back on luxuries so that they could have the world. I remember standing on the porch the day they moved in. Laura stood beside Steve, both of them beaming, full of hope. "You've given us everything," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. It was the first time I had ever felt like they truly understood me, understood what I had done for them. But as the years went by, that gratitude seemed to fade. And what replaced it wasn't a sense of appreciation, but expectation. The phone calls came less often. The visits became sparse. Soon, it was just an occasional message. A birthday wish, a quick hello. The real conversations, they seemed to stop, and so did the appreciation. When Mark got married, I paid for the entire wedding, the venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographers. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't care. I wanted everything to be perfect for him. I remember watching him and his bride MIA as they exchanged vows, and I thought, for a moment, that all of the sacrifices I had made, all the struggles, were worth it. They had a beautiful day, and for a fleeting second, I thought maybe my investment in them, my love, my financial support, had been enough to repay me with joy. I remember pulling Mark aside after the ceremony, when the guests had started to scatter, and I whispered, "I'm proud of you, son." He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Thanks, Dad. I'll always be here for you." It felt like a promise that had been there all along, tucked beneath every check I had ever written, every sacrifice I had ever made. It was supposed to be our unspoken understanding. But that promise, like the others, was starting to fray at the edges. Not long after the wedding, I started feeling that distance again, a gap that no amount of effort on my part could close. Mark's phone calls became infrequent, and when I did see him, it was only for brief moments, usually at family events or holidays. His new life, his career, his marriage, it all seemed so much bigger than the man I had raised, and it was clear there was no room for me in that picture. Then, when I could no longer ignore the mounting debts, the bills I could barely keep up with, I turned to Laura for help. I had given everything I had to them, but now, as I struggled to make ends meet, I felt like I was drowning. "Laura," I said one afternoon, after yet another overdue bill arrived, "can you help me with this? Just until I get back on my feet." Her response wasn't one of concern or sympathy. Instead, she hesitated before saying, "Dad, we're doing fine, but it's just, well, we're not really in a position to help right now." I felt like I had been slapped in the face. The words stung. But it wasn't the refusal that hurt the most. It was the indifference. The way she didn't even seem to care. I had given her everything, and this was how she responded. I stood there, in my own house, with my heart heavy, and the weight of a lifetime of sacrifices pressing on me. I thought about everything I had given. The tuition, the weddings, the down payments, the love. And now, when I needed them most, they were too busy with their own lives to even offer a simple lifeline. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. "We'll always be there for you, Dad," versus, "You need to leave." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just walked away. I took my pride and left. That night, alone in my empty house, I thought about the promises, the whispered assurances, the debts I had paid with love, debts they would never understand. They didn't just forget me, they erased the debt I paid. With love, all of it, every sacrifice, every penny, every moment of my life that I had poured into them, it was gone, and it was as if they had never needed me at all. They were too busy, too distracted by their own lives, to see the man who had made it all possible. And I wondered if, in the end, I had given too much. Because the more I gave, the more they took, and the less of me remained. It wasn't until the bills began stacking up in front of me that I started to ask myself the hard questions. My health had been deteriorating, and I was still reeling from the loneliness of my own family's absence. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that once I was better, things would fall into place. But the bills kept arriving, each one a reminder that things weren't going as planned. I was an intelligent man. I had seen financial hardship before, but I always found a way through it. I wasn't prepared for the overwhelming weight of the reality I was about to uncover. I had spent my life managing finances for others, making the right decisions, never once imagining I would be left to face this mess alone. But when I saw the notice about my mortgage, and then the letter from the bank, the one about the overdue loan, it became clear something wasn't right. I went to the bank first. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait for the paperwork to come through the mail. The bank manager, a young man who barely looked older than my son, met me. With polite indifference, I couldn't blame him. To him, I was just another client. Just another set of numbers on a ledger. But I wasn't going to let him treat me like that. I need to see everything, I said, my voice colder than I intended. All of it. Every loan, every debt attached. To my name, he nodded, pulling up my file on his computer. The more I saw, the more the unease settled in my chest. There were loans I hadn't even remembered co-signing, debts I hadn't known existed. Every paper, every digital signature, was tied to me. But there was one detail that stood out like a red flag. A bankruptcy claim filed under my name, one I had never seen. It was recent, and it was huge. I felt my heart begin to race. How could I not have known about this? How could my children have hidden this from me, allowed me to carry this weight for them without a word? I asked the bank manager for more details, but he couldn't provide them. Just a few more formalities, and a suggestion to contact a lawyer, so I did. The lawyer's office wasn't far, just down the street from the bank. I had been to his office years ago, when I first signed on to help Mark with a contract dispute. He was a sharp man, well-spoken, and professional. But today, as I sat across from him, I could see the same cold detachment in his eyes as I had seen in the bank manager's, the polite facade of someone who saw me as nothing more than another case to handle. I sat in his office, the walls lined with shelves of legal tomes, feeling more isolated than I had ever been. He explained the details of the bankruptcy, how Mark and Laura had jointly filed, how they had racked up debt after debt. I listened, numb. The money they owed wasn't the worst part. What really hit me was when he casually mentioned that I was still on the hook for a number of loans I had co-signed years ago. Mortgage payments, car loans, and personal debts, all of them tied to me. You're still legally responsible for them, he said, his tone matter-of-fact. Until those debts are cleared, they remain your liability. I let the words sink in, feeling the weight of it all settle onto my shoulders. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that they had taken advantage of me, not just emotionally, but financially. They had used me as a safety net, without ever letting me know. They had buried me in debts that they knew I would never see coming. I left the lawyer's office with a sense of numb disbelief. The truth was clearer now than it had ever been. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a situation where they just didn't know how bad things had gotten. They had used me. And worse. They had thought I would never find out. I went home, my mind racing. The house felt different now, colder. The silence that had once been comforting was now oppressive. I walked through the rooms, each step reminding me of what I had built, what I had sacrificed. The house, the memories, the love I had given. It all seemed so hollow now. My own flesh and blood had manipulated me, and I had let it happen. I had been so focused on providing for them, so focused on giving them everything, that I had failed to see what they were doing to me. As I sat down in my chair, I let the anger simmer beneath the surface. I wasn't going to let them ruin me. They thought I was grieving, thought I was too weak to fight back. They thought I was too old, too fragile to have any power left. But they were wrong. They had forgotten one crucial thing. I had been trained for this. I had spent my life handling finances, making strategic decisions. I had always been the one to step in when things went wrong, to make things right. And now, it was my turn. Wasn't just some old man sitting around waiting for death. I wasn't the helpless figure they thought they could take advantage of. I had the skills to fight back, to turn this situation to my advantage. I had the knowledge, the resources, and the patience. They thought they could manipulate me. They thought they could destroy me, but they had no idea what they had awakened. It was time to stop being a victim of my own kindness. Time to stop hoping that everything would magically fix itself. It wasn't going to. And as I sat in my empty living room, staring at the pile of legal documents in front of me, I realized how much I had underestimated myself. My children thought they could walk over me, take advantage of my love, and leave me to pick up the pieces, but I wasn't a fool. I wasn't just some old man sitting in the corner waiting for the end. I had trained for moments like this. The world of finance, the intricacies of law, the cold logic of strategy. These were the areas where I had once thrived, and just because I had put them aside in favor of raising a family didn't mean those skills had disappeared. They were still in me, buried beneath years of sacrifice, but now they were coming back to the surface with a vengeance. I picked up the phone and made the first call. My old bank manager, the one who had helped me with loans and investments all those years ago, picked up after the third ring. He didn't recognize my voice at first, but once I mentioned my name, he remembered. "Of course, Mr. Edwards, how can I assist you?" he said, a tone of professionalism quickly replacing the earlier hesitation. "I need everything you've got on my accounts," I said, my voice steely and firm, "and I need you to move quickly. I'll pay any fees required." There was a pause on the other end. The last time I'd been in this office, I had been a trusted customer, a man with a plan, a man who always paid his debts on time. Now, I was a man who was out for blood, he agreed. We arranged the logistics, and I hung up the phone, feeling the first stirrings of something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Next. I called a lawyer I knew from back in the day, a sharp mind, one who had always prided himself on being meticulous. When he answered, I wasted no time. "I need everything you've got on my children's legal liabilities," I told him. "Their loans, their bankruptcy filings, their debts. I need it all, fast." His voice turned serious. "Of course, Mr. Edwards. I'll get that information to you as soon as possible." Once that call ended, I sat back in my chair, the weight of the world still pressing down on me. But for the first time, in what felt like forever, I wasn't passive. I wasn't reacting. I was planning, and that was the key. I'd always been a planner, a strategist. And as I looked out over the lawn, the same lawn I had planted years ago with my own hands, I felt the calm, cool certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was going to do next. It was a game of chess, and they had made the fatal mistake of thinking I was a pawn. But I was the one who had invented the board. I spent the next few days organizing everything. Documents, bank statements, legal contracts. I reached out to a financial planner I had worked with in the past and began to build a case. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about making them understand the cost of betraying someone who had given everything. That with each conversation, each new report I received, the picture became clearer. They had thought they could cover their tracks, hide their debts from me, but they underestimated how far I would go. I wasn't just tracking down financial mismanagement. I was building a strategic advantage. I had kept meticulous records over the years, and now I was using those same records against them. Every penny they had taken, every promise they had. Broken, I had it all in black and white. I started drafting a letter. A letter that would be the first step in my campaign. It was cold, calculated, and to the point. There would be no emotion in it. There would be no forgiveness. Only a simple statement of facts. It read, "You have exhausted my patience. I've come to know everything. Your debts, your manipulations, your lies. I am holding you accountable. For everything, consider this a final warning." The game has changed. I read it again, letting the words sink in. There was no anger in the letter, no rage, only a quiet, controlled certainty that I had finally taken control of my own life again. I had no intention of backing down. This was no longer a matter of money. It was about reclaiming what they had taken from me, my dignity, my respect, and my right to live without the shadow of their betrayal looming over me. You don't play chess with someone who invented the board, I thought, as I prepared to send the letter. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, and as I sealed the envelope, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The pieces were in place. Now, it was time to let them see what happened when you tried to play a game you didn't understand. I didn't lift a finger to help them, not once. And in the silence of my own home, I watched as everything they had built, everything they had once paraded in front of me, as their success slowly began to crumble. It started with the phone calls. My daughter Laura would call, but it wasn't the usual cheerful voice I had grown used to. No, now her voice was tight with stress, her words clipped, hurried. "Dad, you wouldn't believe what happened," she said one evening, the frustration palpable in her tone. "The loan we applied for, the one to expand the business, denied. Can you believe that?" She didn't wait for me to answer. She didn't want to hear my voice. She just needed someone to listen to the sound of her panic. But I didn't say a word. I sat in my chair, the phone pressed to my ear, and I simply listened. I didn't let the bitterness slip into my voice. I didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing that I had known this day would come. The business was failing. It had been a slow decline, a series of poor decisions and unchecked debts that had been mounting under her nose. She had thought she could keep it afloat with a few more loans, a few more risky moves. But, in the end, no amount of borrowing could cover the cracks that had been growing. Beneath the surface, Laura's call was just the first in a series. Mark's business wasn't faring any better. I watched as his store, once bustling with customers, began to show signs of neglect. The shelves that used to be stocked with the latest gadgets were now gathering dust. The staff that had once been enthusiastic was now dwindling, and the small stream of customers had slowed to a trickle. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that his shop had been behind on rent for months, the landlord threatening to evict him. I didn't intervene. I didn't offer advice or support. Let them deal with the mess they had created. Let them face the consequences of their actions. I had been the one who had paid the price for their mistakes for years. Now, it was their turn. Then came the breakdowns. It wasn't just businesses crumbling. Their personal lives were following suit. Mark's car, a luxury vehicle he had bought to flaunt his success, had broken down on the highway one afternoon. I heard it from the neighbors, who had seen him struggling to get it to the mechanic. He had once told me, with such pride, that the car was an investment, a symbol of his achievements. But it was just another reminder of his failure. Then, there were the foreclosure letters. The ones I had anticipated, the ones that would mark the end of everything they had taken from me. The house I had co-signed for Mark was no longer his. It had been sold at auction, the debt he owed too large to ignore. He hadn't told me, of course, but I knew. I could see the tension in his face the next time we spoke. The way his words faltered when I asked how things were going. He had no choice but to swallow the truth. His home was gone, and all he could do was hope that someone, anyone, would help him put the pieces together. I didn't offer a word. Through all of it, I watched quietly. I didn't interfere. I didn't offer the solutions I had once given them so easily. I didn't rescue them from their own destruction. They had pushed me away, and now, they would reap the rewards of their arrogance. And through it all, I couldn't help but reflect. They thought I was the rain, They thought I would flood their lives with pity, with help, with sympathy, they thought. They could weather the storm. That they could take what they wanted from me and still expect me to be there when things went wrong. But I wasn't the rain. I was the drought. I had let them dry up on their own. They thought they could count on me forever, but I had taken my love, my care, and my patience with me. I had stopped watering the roots of a tree that would never grow. Now, I stood at a distance, watching their collapse from afar. It was poetic, really. The children I had given everything to were now realizing the cost of taking me for granted. They had squandered everything I had given them, and now they had nothing left. No money, no stability, no safety net. I wasn't going to be there to catch them this time. Not again. It didn't take long for them to come back. It never does. One by one, they reappeared at my door, each of them cloaked in desperation. Their voices laced with the familiar tones of guilt and fear. The money had run out, the debts had caught up with them, and the businesses they had once paraded around as empires had all but crumbled to dust. It started with Laura. I had been sitting in my chair, the house still silent and unchanged, when the knock came at the door. I opened it without hesitation, knowing exactly who it was before I even saw her face. Dad. Laura's voice was thick with emotion, her eyes red, as though she had been crying. I need your help, please. I didn't answer her immediately. I just stood there, watching her, allowing the silence to stretch between us. She shifted uncomfortably, and for a brief moment, I could almost see the little girl she used to be, the one who once needed me for everything. But that child was long gone, replaced by a woman who had betrayed me, a woman who had used me without hesitation. I don't know who else to turn to, she continued, her voice trembling. Mark. He's in trouble. His business is failing. And we have debts, huge ones, and we can't fix it on our own. Dad, we don't have anyone else. Her words were laced with desperation, but it wasn't the desperation of someone who had made a mistake. No, it was the desperation of someone who had expected me to be there, someone who had taken me for granted, and now, in their moment of crisis, was looking for redemption. I know it's been a long time since I asked for your help, she continued, glancing away. But please, you're the only one who can save us. I know you've been angry. I know I've let you down. But we need you, Dad. We need you to help us out of this. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, letting the silence hang in the air. She swallowed hard, her face twisting with pain. I know it's a lot to ask, but Mum would have helped. She would have wanted you to help us. The mention of her mother, my late wife, was a low blow, a calculated attempt to stir old emotions, to pull at the heartstrings of a man who had once given everything for his family. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just stared at her, letting her words hang in the air. Mum would have wanted this, she repeated, softer this time, her voice barely above a whisper. It was as if she thought invoking her mother would make everything right again. She thought I was weak enough to be manipulated by guilt. But what she didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that they had already burned through all the love and trust I had left to give. It wasn't love they needed now, it was money. Mark appeared just as she finished speaking. His face was drawn, his clothes a bit too worn for someone his age. He stepped forward, joining her at the door, and the moment he opened his mouth, I knew what he would say. Dad, we're sorry, he started, his voice cracking. I know I screwed up, but I didn't know it would get this bad. We were just trying to build something, and now everything's falling apart. You're the only one who can fix this. Please, we need help. They both stood there, looking at me with pleading eyes, the same eyes that had once filled with pride when they were children, when I had been their hero. Now, those same eyes were filled with desperation, fear, and the unmistakable recognition that they had nothing left, no plan, no way out, just me. The person they had walked away from, the person they thought would always be there to fix their mess. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, letting the silence stretch between us, like a rope pulling tighter. I watched them crumble before me, both of them so consumed by their own failure that they couldn't even see the depth of their own manipulation. They had been so confident, so certain of their ability to use me as a safety net, to take advantage of my love, and now they were desperate. They wanted me to be their savior, to come rushing in and fix the chaos they had created. But I was no longer that person. I had been that person once, but not anymore. I wasn't their family anymore. I was their creditor. With that final silent thought, I turned away from the door and walked back into the house. The sound of their footsteps on the porch was drowned by the echoing silence inside. They would never understand, but that didn't matter. They didn't need to. I had given them everything I could. Now, they would have to learn the price of taking it all for granted. It was quiet when they arrived, just as it had always been. I didn't need to say anything as I opened the door and motioned for them to come in. Mark and Laura stood on the doorstep, their faces a mixture of anticipation and dread. They had come, once again, looking for something for me to give them an out, for me to forgive them. They thought they could manipulate me with their desperation. But I had something else in mind. I didn't say a word as they entered the house. I simply led them into the living room, where the same silence that had hung between us for months still clung to the walls. The floorboards creaked under their steps, and they both paused in front of the coffee table, their eyes moving from the pile of papers laid neatly in front of them to me. I didn't sit down. I stood, calm and steady, my hands folded in front of me. It was a position of power, one I had claimed through patience and careful planning. They, on the other hand, were on the edge of their seats, waiting for me to speak, waiting for the words that would either destroy them completely or offer them a chance at redemption. But I had no intention of offering redemption. Not this time. I've been reviewing the records, I said quietly, my voice steady. All the loans you took out, the credit lines, the debts, everything is here. I tapped the stack of documents on the table. I have a timeline. I know every move you made, every decision that led us here. They didn't speak. They just stared at me, as if expecting me to explode, to yell, to let the anger I had held back all this time spill over. But I didn't. I simply handed them each a file, one by one. It was the slow, quiet realization that I had been building something much more powerful than just the money they had taken from me. Mark opened his file first, his hands shaking slightly as he flipped through the pages. I could see the shock in his eyes as he read through the loan documents, the bankruptcy filings, the missed payments, all of it meticulously detailed in black and white. Do you see it? I asked, my tone even. Every penny you owe. Every contract you signed, every decision you made that led you here. And I am the one who has been left holding the bill. Laura looked at her own file, her face growing pale as she scanned the pages. I could tell she hadn't expected this, hadn't expected me to come prepared. The shock on both of their faces was evident, the realization dawning that they had been caught in their lies, in their manipulation, all along. You thought I was grieving, I said softly, my eyes never leaving theirs. You thought I wouldn't fight back, but you were wrong. They both looked at each other, their expressions filled with disbelief, as if trying to process the weight of what I was showing them. The slow-burning anger I had kept hidden was now fully realized, and the power had shifted. They had spent so long thinking they controlled everything, thinking I was weak. But now, the tables were turned. You see, I continued, my voice still calm, the game you tried to play with me is over. I've been building my case for months. Every piece of evidence, every document, has led us to this point. I leaned forward slightly, letting them feel the full force of the reality I had created. This isn't about forgiveness. This is about accountability. They didn't say anything. They just stared at me. The weight of their actions finally crashing down on them. The quiet realization that they had underestimated me, that they had been playing a game they didn't understand, was written all over their faces. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch, before I added, now, it's time to talk terms. I stood before them, the documents still laid out on the table, the weight of everything hanging in the air like a dense fog. They had come to me, expecting mercy, expecting that I would swoop in like I had done countless times before to save them from the consequences of their actions. But this time, I wasn't their savior. This time, I was their reckoning. I could see the hesitation in their eyes, the uncertainty as they looked at the stack of legal contracts. Mark's jaw tightened as he shifted in his seat, his hands clenched. At his sides, Laura's eyes darted nervously between the papers and me, her lips trembling as if she were about to speak but unsure of what to say. They knew what was coming. They knew this wasn't going to be easy. "You want my help?" I asked, my voice firm. "I will offer it, but it comes with conditions." Mark and Laura exchanged a quick glance, the unspoken words passing between them. I could almost hear their thoughts. They were waiting for me to offer some kind of rescue, but I wasn't here to rescue them. I was here to make them understand the cost of betrayal, the cost of treating me like I was disposable. The silence stretched for a long moment before I finally spoke. "The first condition is simple," I said, sliding a document across the table. "A public apology. A full acknowledgement of everything you've done to me, to each other, and to everyone you've taken advantage of." They both stiffened. Mark opened his mouth, but I raised my hand to silence him. "This isn't about what you think is right. This is about what's owed. You need to stand before those you've wronged and admit your mistakes. Only then can you begin to rebuild anything, even if it's just your own dignity." The words hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. They looked at each other, the idea of admitting their wrongs clearly painful. But there was no other choice. They had burned every bridge, and now they had to rebuild it, brick by brick. But they weren't going to do it without paying the price. I leaned forward slightly. "The second condition is a legal contract. You will sign a binding agreement that includes financial restitution. You owe me more than just money. You owe me your integrity. And you will pay, one way or another. This contract will outline everything, how and when you will repay the debts, and it will hold you accountable." Laura's eyes flickered with resistance. "But no buts," I interrupted. "You wanted my help, and now you get it under my terms. No exceptions." They shifted, uncomfortably in their seats, their pride struggling against the reality of the situation. But I wasn't done yet. "The third condition is obedience," I said, locking eyes with them both. "You will follow my guidance. You will do what I say, whether it's getting your finances in order, attending therapy, or following through with every single step of this repayment process. If you want to prove you've learned something, if you want to even pretend to deserve my help, you will listen. You will do everything I tell you. No shortcuts." They stared at me, their mouths tight, their resistance palpable. But they knew deep down that they had no choice. They had come to me for mercy, but I wasn't offering any free passes. There were no shortcuts in life, and certainly no shortcuts to redemption. The final condition was the hardest, but I wasn't about to soften it. "Finally," I said, my voice quiet but unwavering, "you will submit to financial oversight. I will control your finances for a while, at least until I'm satisfied that you've proven yourself worthy of trust again. You won't make any significant purchases without my approval. You'll have to earn the right to even breathe freely." Mark let out a sharp breath, and Laura's face went pale. They had come expecting me to offer them an escape, to offer them help, but instead, I had put them in a cage of their own making. They had no choice but to accept. I could see them grappling with the terms. I could see the struggle in their eyes as they tried to negotiate with their pride, their arrogance, their anger. But in the end, they knew they were cornered. They didn't want to admit it, but they knew I had them. Mark finally looked up, his voice tight with barely contained rage. "So this is it, huh? You're just going to—" I cut him off with a single cold glance. "Yes, this is it. You wanted mercy. But mercy isn't free." There was no more resistance. They finally gave in, their shoulders slumping in reluctant acceptance. The air between us had shifted completely. The power was no longer theirs. It was mine. They would follow the rules, or they would suffer the consequences. I slid a check across the table, a small amount, considering the debts I had forgiven them. The final insult, the final statement. "Here's your lifeline," I said, my voice low, my eyes hard. "But don't mistake this for kindness. This is a transaction, and I expect you to fulfill your end of the deal. This is your last chance. You've burned every other bridge." They picked up the check, their fingers trembling as they held it. It was too little, too late. They knew it, but they had no choice. They would follow through, or they would pay the price. As they left, I didn't say another word. The door clicked shut behind them, and I stood there, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. Mercy wasn't free, and neither was their redemption. I stood alone in the living room, the silence wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. The house felt different now, no longer a prison of memory and betrayal, but a sanctuary, a place that I had built and protected through sheer will. The sunlight filtered softly through the windows, casting long shadows on the floor. The air was still, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the weight of everything, the pain, the anger, the endless battle, seemed to fade into the background. There was no more noise, no more conflict. The storm had passed. It had taken everything with it. But it had also left something behind, peace. I had always thought that peace would feel like an absence of noise. I had expected it to be the quiet after the fight, the calm that comes after the storm. But it wasn't that. It was something more profound. It was the stillness that comes after you've finally taken control, the quiet that comes when you realize you've reclaimed your power. I walked over to the old wooden shelf where the family photographs were kept. There, framed in a simple silver border, was the picture of my late wife. Her smile, the one that had always made me feel like everything would be okay, stared back at me. I hadn't thought about her in months, not since everything had unraveled. But now, standing there in the quiet of this home I had built for her, for us, I couldn't help but feel the absence of her presence. I reached up, gently touching the frame, my fingers brushing over the glass. For a moment, I let the memories wash over me. The laughter, the love, the moments we shared that had defined the life we had created. And then, just as quickly, the realization settled in. She wasn't here. She had been taken from me, just like everything else. But in that moment, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt resolve. I had protected this home, this life, for so long. And now, for the first time, I was at peace with the choices I had made. I wasn't going to let them take any more from me. I wasn't going to be their safety net anymore. They had learned, or they hadn't. It didn't matter. They would have to live with the consequences. The room felt warmer now, the sun casting golden hues on the walls, as if the house itself was reflecting the shift inside me. I wasn't the broken man they thought I was. I wasn't the frail, grieving old fool they had assumed I'd become. I wasn't their family anymore. I was their creditor. And as I stood there, alone in the peace that I had created, I realized that the justice I had sought wasn't just about what I had done. It was about what they would never understand. They wanted me gone. Now, they can't move without me. The words were quiet, spoken only to the empty room, but they felt true. In every part of me, they thought they had won, thought they had driven me to the edge. But in the end, I had won. I had taken back everything they had stolen from me. And now they would have to live with the consequences of their greed and neglect. As I sat down, in my chair, I glanced out the window at the garden I had tended so carefully. The flowers, once withered, now stood tall, their colors bright in the light of the setting sun. A breeze stirred the leaves of the trees, and in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Kindness is not weakness, it's patience. Weaponized, the words felt like a mantra, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The fight had been long, and it had cost me much, but in the end, justice had worn the scent of roses this year.